What do Polyphia, Sean, Animals as Leaders, and Guthrie Govan all have in common? I mean, besides making us feel like absolute amateurs, they embody some variation of modern guitar. But what does that mean? On this channel, I mention the term modern guitar quite often, and while I define the concept loosely in relation to the artists and styles I reference, it isn't a term that has a ton of concrete, well-defined characteristics. Most of the time it's cited as an abstract categorization to describe today's popular refinement of guitar music. So I wanted to unpack what really makes modern guitar unique, including how it differs from other styles and the significance it holds today as a music genre. And maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to paint a clearer picture of what modern guitar really is. In the general context, modern guitar is essentially an umbrella term used to distinguish a style that is independent of the blueprinted approach that was most common in the late 20th century. Put simply, if you were to show a non-guitarist a video of your guitar playing and their immediate reaction is,
"Wow, that's not what I expected,"
congratulations, you're probably a modern guitarist. Obviously that's an exaggeration and not an accurate assessment, but it does express the unique implications of how various artists are able to utilize the instrument. And it also goes to show how unpredictable the modern sound can be. To really get my point across, I want to break down the different guitar eras by comparing them to something totally unrelated: architecture. Just stick with me. First, we have classic rock, the staple of guitar music and where a lot of the techniques adopted today originated. So we're gonna label this as Gothic architecture. Classy, sure, but also a little repetitive. Overall, you get a similar style across every building, and once you've seen one, you've pretty much seen them all. Next, we have neoclassical architecture, where there's still a consistent design and structure, but there's more range in its variants. And although it is different, you can clearly see where the inspiration was drawn. And lastly, there's the anything goes fusion genre, which will apply to modern architecture. This style has a much larger scope of where it draws inspirations, and interpretations can vary from person to person. This style includes plays off of virtually everything, and to say the least, it's practically made up of anything that could be considered different. Now that I got that out of the way, let's hone in on what makes modern guitar, well, modern. Throughout my music career, I've always had this deep fascination with modern guitar, primarily because it's what I grew up always wanting to play, but also because it takes on a form that isn't constrained to previously established styles of music. It's almost like this laissez, free-range approach to guitar playing. For the longest time, I've tried to summarize what makes modern guitar modern. And even though modern guitar simply applies to a compilation of blended musical components, it does adhere to guidelines that constitute what sounds fall under that label. So after analyzing a ton of guitarists across various genres, I came up with 4 significant features that sort of demarcate the classification of a modern guitar style. So let's start with the most obvious feature: tone, which is probably the most flexible aspect of modern guitar, as there's really no barrier to its manipulation. And when I talk about tone, I'm not just referring to basic amp settings. I'm talking about sound sculpting, which includes production elements that may go beyond the guitar itself. Modern guitar has given rise to the popularization of a diverse selection of these different tones. And with production equipment becoming increasingly accessible, it's never been easier to craft obscure, compelling sounds. It has even become normalized to make use of tones that may not even sound like a guitar at all. I personally find this to be pretty amazing because this adoption demonstrates the capabilities the guitar possesses as a musical tool, in contrast to just serving as a main instrument. High gain tones are also becoming more obsolete by the year, since overdriven distortion doesn't allow the headroom for the involvement of delicate runs and intricate phrasings, since most of those subtle additions would end up drowned out by the fuzz from the gain. In the past, tones were pretty consistent across most guitarists. Not that it was necessarily their fault, as gear wasn't nearly as modulable and customizable as it is today. But since that was understood, you didn't need your guitar to sound like an alien spacecraft to get a seat at the table. At this moment in time, however, tone can carry just as much weight as what the guitarist is playing. And because tone is so meaningful when it comes to how a composition is emotionally interpreted, today you have so many artists mixing and matching unique sounds with productions you wouldn't expect, creating some pretty unusual but captivating combinations. And it's this concept of breaking away from musical standards that has led to modern guitar's most recognizable trait: genre ambiguity, or to simplify, genre fluidity. I know it sounds a little funny. If you were to play Master of Puppets, which undeniably falls under the genre of metal, without distortion, would it still be metal? Like, genuinely, if your cat heard this, would they say,
"Ah, that's pretty metal"?
Maybe not. So we can prove that tone in some way shapes the perception of where a song is likely to fall across the spectrum of music genres. When you bring a proponent as simple as tone into an equation with the infinite permutations of music productions, you're going to get a ton of different pairings, making it particularly difficult to classify a song as purely jazz or purely metal. Let's use the song Chimera by Polyphia as an example. There's flamenco-style acoustics, heavy 7-string chugging, trap beats, EDM influenced productions, and vocals from a rap artist. Now that's pretty damn modern. Sure, the notion of Polyphia being a rock band has already been established, but to flatly describe this song as rock would disregard all of the nuance that's expressed throughout the track. So to save the headache, we label it as rock fusion. And this practice of pulling some aspects from one genre and a few from another has played a huge role in creating this vast musical landscape that modern guitar entails. This was most certainly a thing 50 years ago, but since most music distributions were managed by labels and radio networks, it was almost necessary for music of a particular genre to share foundational similarities. Today, that's certainly not the case, and as a result, you get this mixing pot with artists concocting their own sound salads and experimenting with different ingredients. Now, simply having a saucy tone and making music that doesn't perfectly fit into a box isn't going to guarantee that what you make checks off as modern. But the recipe really starts to take shape once you introduce the next characteristic, textured melodies. I listened to some of the most popular classic guitar riffs, and what I found was the solo melodies often heavily rely on the rhythm section to carry the song. By this, I mean the melodic progression isn't really present throughout the riff or solo itself. But in modern guitar, the melody often incorporates chords into the riff itself, creating this richer, more complex sound. This may sound like a minor detail, but when extrapolated, you can actually understand why modern guitar writings happen to be musically richer. The versatility of the writing helps to add depth, making modern riffage more dynamic and multi-layered than the straightforward melodies of the past. Now, there's a ton of reasons why this would be the case, including the rise of bedroom artists and fewer guitarists being in full bands, but the fundamental truth is newer age guitar music often incorporates rhythm sections into the lead writing. Take a look at most artists you classify as modern, and you'll see that oftentimes there's some type of chordal progression built in their guitar writing. Now, it won't be all of them, of course, as this isn't a strict determinant for whether a style falls under the modern category, but it's definitely in the catalog. I don't think it'd be crazy to say that the variability and textures of modern melodies is what makes them so intriguing compared to older guitar works. And I'm talking about everything from polyphonic rhythms to layered harmonies to contrasts in timbre or velocity. But what's so cool about this concept is that it increases distinguishability across different artists. Some create this chordal balance through playing chords and tapping, some thump the bass notes while plucking the lead, and some arpeggiate the chords to incorporate them into the riffage. There's just a ton of unique ways that guitarists are building these full-bodied progressions. The fact that the feature of texturing music has become so prevalent in modern music has opened the door to the last characteristic I wanted to talk about, which is innovation. Innovation would without a doubt have to be the single most important criteria when describing a modern guitarist or even modern artist for that matter. Across virtually every guitarist that can be classified as modern, there's some original approach that's exclusive to their playing specifically. And I believe it's this unexpendable novelty found across most modern guitarists that makes them so intriguing to audiences that enjoy new age guitar playing. And due to the average guitarist today being light years ahead of the OGs in terms of technical ability, which I would argue is a fact, there's a lot more emphasis on how artists implement a given technique. And I'm focusing strictly on technical aspects like writing arrangements, production tactics, and just overall playing capabilities. I wouldn't bet my life on the claim that today's guitarists are point blank better guitar players, because that premise would be built off of completely different benchmarks. But today's guitar music is certainly more varied and interesting. And if anyone wants to 1v1 me on that take, just say the word. Look at any of today's most popular guitarists: Tim Henson, Pliny, Marson, Yvette Young, Mateus Isato, Tosin Abasi. Every single one of them possess a distinct trait that separates their sound from the rest. So through this lens, the question of who's the better guitar player doesn't even arise, as each of them respectively portray guitar music in vastly unassociated ways. While this concept does hold true for guitarists who were most prevalent in the mid 20th century, their playing field back then was a lot flatter. Most artists during that time shared a similar framework across tones, composition, and proficiency. So considering their lack of spectral diversity in comparison to now, you certainly had to be creative, but the threshold for what made a guitarist technical during that time was substantially lower. As modern guitar continues to evolve, we're bound to see more innovation and new subgenres emerge. We're already seeing styles like maximalist hyper rock become more mainstream as it pushes the edge of intense, fast-paced guitar music with exaggerated productions. And with technology becoming even more integrated into music, who knows where we'll be in just a few years. Guitars will likely be used more and more as modulation devices, with the growing presence of vocoders and octavers within guitar music. There's just so many cool new implications that are going to transpire from this modern guitar period we're currently in. So what do you guys think? If I missed something or there's a point you'd like to elaborate on, feel free to drop it down below in the comments. But as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.